Hey, everybody. It's Marlon Gardenera, host of the Divided States of America show. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Got a couple special guests today. On one hand, someone close to the reality in Akron, Ohio, someone who knew Jayland Walker, the young man who was gunned down. Obviously, we don't know all the details. There's a lot more to come, but we wanted to talk to somebody close. And you know my role as a coach in my real life, so there's no better person to talk to us from that perspective. I think he knows it. I think he gets it. So he'll be here to help. But until then, let's get this show started.
Welcome to the Divided States of America show, where your host, Marlon Gardenera, takes on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. We'll sort through the best and worst of politics and culture, asking questions and looking for answers that our two-ring, two-party circus has failed to provide.
Again, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to today's show, whether you're catching it live or you're catching it on demand, whether you catch it when you're on a walk, whether you catch it in the gym, maybe you're listening at lunch, maybe you're on your drive home. I appreciate you tuning in no matter when you do it. We're here to have real conversations with real people, talking about real issues in this divided states of America. Folks, we know it's divided. We see it every day. It doesn't matter what the topic is. There's this side, there's that side. And really no issue, I almost feel like no issue goes without people picking a side. At some point, wouldn't it be nice if we were all on the same side? What if it were nice if we were all asking the same questions, had the same concerns, and we shared concerns for people maybe that you wouldn't even normally think we would, but that we were looking out for one another? That would probably be a real nice place to be. It almost seems utopian. It almost seems like I should expect a unicorn to run down my street first. But I know there are enough people out there who care about enough of the other people out there. And the only thing we can do is try. The only thing we can do is have these conversations and then put what we talk about here to action. You're all familiar with the case, Jayland Walker, Akron, Ohio. June 27th, a young man was pulled over for what was reported to be a traffic stop. He began to evade that traffic stop, took off. You hear reports, and again, I don't have all the information. We don't have all the details. There's lots of things that need to be worked out. There are outside investigators. Obviously, this case is going to be scrutinized for all the right reasons, but that's going to happen. And as we get through and hear more information, we're going to have some real issues to deal with. But again, I wanted to bring somebody on today who is closer to that situation, closer to that scenario. Again, if you hadn't heard, June 27th, Jayland Walker, Akron, Ohio. Evaded police. Police report having heard a gunshot coming from the vehicle's direction. There's a video that shows a muzzle flash. Again, all those details have to be worked out. I'm no expert in any one of those areas. They get to a park. The subject jumps out of the car on the passenger side, runs away unarmed, and was shot 60 times. You can imagine that there were probably more bullets beyond then. Lots of questions. It was reported. Again, I don't have all the facts. I'm not looking at police reports. I don't have the conclusion reported that there was a movement made in the park right before the shooting, that an officer or two feared that he might have a weapon. I tell you, I'm bringing a guest on later in the show that's going to talk about some of that training, some of those scenarios where cops are worried about going home and situations escalate, but I'll have somebody address those things a little bit later. But listen, you know my standpoint. I want the truth. I want the facts. I want the details to come out. And I also want it to be remembered that on anyone's worst day, we still want justice to be served in a courtroom. Doesn't matter how bad that day is. And I understand when it gets to the point where someone else's life is in jeopardy, people take different actions. They react differently, different timing. Again, the investigation will flush all of that out. But this case involves a young man. With that young man come people who've poured into his life. I'm happy to bring one of those people on the show right now. With us, Robert Hubbard. And I'm going to call him by a different name. I'm going to call him by the name that I expect or hope most people call me, because I know where my heart is. I know where my time and effort goes. I know where my time, talent, and treasure goes. It goes into coaching young people. This man does the same. This man knows Jayland Walker as his coach. Coach Hubbard, thank you for coming on the show.
First, thank you for having me, and thank you uh, for giving me this voice to share some light on the not what the you're hearing in the news reports or hearing from the police department, but a gentleman that I actually know. So thank you.
No, glad to have you with us. My condolences. I shared with you, we talked yesterday. I am a coach. We had a recent loss in our family of a young man. I have two sons. I'm not even going to waste any conversation talking about what it would be like to lose them. That's a silly conversation. But when you coach people, when you pour your heart into to who they are and hopefully what they will be, the loss of one of them punches you right in the gut. I'm assuming you felt the same.
Definitely, definitely. Um, One of the first things when I did find out, um, one shock, um, because this gentleman, when he was on my team, I've coached for years, and this uh, no exaggeration, this is one of the nicest, sweetest kids I ever coached. Not that that should matter a lot of times, but I'm telling you, he was one of the sweetest kids. I've known him for a while, and one of the first things was was it something I could have done? Was it some guidance I could have given him to keep him from ending up that way? Was it something I didn't share with him? And I went back and looked at the last picture I took with him. It just um, and looking at that picture, and he was smiling. Everything seemed okay, and I'm wondering, was it something I didn't do? And then I'm looking at the other folks in the picture. How they've done. Do I need to reach out to them and make sure they're doing okay? And I'm looking at the picture, and uh, uh, there's him who I knew at the time was working at a factory. There's a teacher now that was teaching at the school we were at. Another guy was a deputy sheriff in law enforcement. And it's like, well, some of the kids, it seem like they're doing okay. What did I do wrong? Why didn't I reach Jaylen? So yeah, that was because as I expressed to you yesterday, the news reports came out about the shooting, but they didn't release a name of who it was, and I was like, oh man, that's terrible. And then one of his friends had posted something saying, I can't believe Jaylen this happened to Jaylen, and I reached out to that friend, and that friend is actually in law enforcement, and I said, well, what happened? What happened to Jaylen? And he said, well, call me, coach. And I call him, and he starts going step by step, like, well, see what happened was, and I said, well, wait a minute, are you talking about that police shooting? He said, yes. I said, Jaylen? He said, yeah. I said, no, no way. I mean, because the kid I knew, um, when I thought of it, I was like, I bet he never got a detention when he was in high school. He wasn't a kid. And I've had kids that have pushed my limits, that have taken me there. Jaylen was not one of those kids. Um, so it was just shock at first. And then it was, what could I've done differently? So
Listen,
yeah, that's where I was at.
I enjoy that I can relate to you as a coach. I hate that I can relate to the words you're sharing now. Um, um, a lot of coaches want to win. My victories, hopefully, will come through the kids and their kids and their kids. Our championship, we were fortunate enough to win a state championship out here in football in California. That
Woo,
that
impressive.
means thank you, but that means nothing in relation to the results that we hope to get from these kids as a result of the things that we teach in sports. And I've said this 1,000 times. I'll say it 1,000 times more. Discipline, learning how to deal with adversity, being dedicated. I mean, pure commitment, working hard. I always tell people if a kid doesn't go to the military or become a fitness buff, they may likely never work as hard as they did when they played football. And the only time I have to take a backseat to that reality is when they wrestle, because that's what you were doing. Automatically when I hear a kid wrestles, to me, it says something about that kid. Before we get even into any details about the person and their lives, the things that actually happen, it says something about them. I remember in high school, I went to a school called Mission Bay out here in California, in San Diego. I remember walking in the weight room and the windows were crying, is what I thought. They were sweating. And I had never seen that. So to me, the first thing I know about Jayland Walker was he was a wrestler, and the dedication and the time and the effort. How long you been doing that, Coach? How long have you been pouring into these kids?
I try not to add it up, but it actually started in 2002. So if you do the math, it's been quite a while.
I
Um,
understand.
and
I
and I
understand.
like that phrase "pour into." And I was living in. I grew up here, and I live about a half a mile from where I live now. And I moved away. I was going to school in D.C. And while I was there, we had me and my wife. We had three kids, and we were looking for a place to move. And at the time, I said, "Well, Akron, it was good. I liked it. They have a good education." And I couldn't really express why I really thought Akron was a good place to raise a kid. And then it took me after being here back home a few years where before it hit me that when I was growing up, there were folks that poured into me. There was coaches that was there for me, and I didn't realize that till after I've been coaching for a while. That that's what I was trying to do. What those coaches did for me, and you said exactly pour into them. And I had those coaches that did that for me, and I couldn't expect it to my wife, even though she listened to me and she followed me here anyway. But that's what it was. I had coaches that poured into me, and I was thinking my kids could get that same thing, and I think they did growing up here. They had great experiences here, and that's what you try to do with these kids. And like you say, your victories aren't really on the mat or on the field. It's in life when they reach back to you and say, "Can you come to my college graduation?" It's like what? Of course I can. Or when they invite you to their wedding, or just they're having that baby that they're going to be there for and take care of. That those are victories. Or um, you get that text message. I got a text message one year where I had a gentleman that been on my team. His father, I didn't even know it till like his third or fourth year that his father had been incarcerated his whole life, and got out like his senior in high school. And when he was in college, he texted me. He said, "Coach, I just need to thank you, and he thanked the football coach too. You guys were the father I needed at that point in my life." Because my father wasn't there. I mean, how do you get a text out like that and not break up? It's just like, man, but that's why you do these things. It's like you said, it's not for the wins on the field so much. It's the wins in life.
Well, obviously, you and I both unfortunately know the reality that life can end prematurely. Again, I'm sorry. I appreciate your willingness to come on. We're talking to Coach Robert Hubbard, Jayland Walker's coach, the young man killed on June 27th in Akron, Ohio. Again, I don't know that I could have had these conversations right away. It took a little while. It took a whole lot of tears. It took a lot of conversations with the young men in our football family because you immediately go into prevent mode to do everything you possibly can to let them know that there are people and ways to get help regardless of what the circumstance is, regardless of what their situation is. And I think in this case, we know Jayland was dealing with the loss of a fiance. Life hits you. It doesn't care what you want, where you're at, what you're doing. When things happen, they happen. And we all, I know you, I can speak for you when I say this. We want all our players to know they can always come back to us. We'll be there. Now, in our conversation, in the brief conversation we had yesterday, and I think you mentioned it a little while ago, it doesn't matter who he was. I think oftentimes when something happens to someone, we automatically assume the type of person they are either justifies or explains away horrible things happening to them. And I can't say enough, we don't know all of the details to the case, but we certainly have questions, we certainly have concerns. But what we don't want to get lost in this is yes, Jayland Walker was a great kid. He really was a great kid. But he could have been having the single worst day of his life, and he could have made some of the worst decisions ever, ever. And life circumstances do that to people, and how people handle it are entirely different. But we all still hope at the end of the day they go home, jail. I don't care where they go, but that they have the ability to go somewhere. So at the end of the day, we're dealing with the loss of someone, regardless of the circumstances. Again, that'll come back to us. We'll get that information, but we're dealing with the loss of somebody. And again, I can't thank you enough for being willing to be here. When we talked yesterday, I asked about the climate in Akron. It's sad how the news cycles work. One day that was the biggest, loudest, scariest thing that could ever happen. The next day it started to fade away. It sounds like Akron didn't get a chance to grieve that before some more things happen. But how's Akron doing right now?
It was a tempest pot for a while there, a few days. There were some quiet protests, peaceful protests, where folks were listing demands that they wanted, but they were peaceful with it. And then as night would grow, a younger crowd would come out there, and it wasn't so peaceful. Some damage to some property and some things like that. For several days, they had to start a curfew. And then, like you said, a couple days later, we had another tragedy here where uh, a young girl of 4 years old, which happened to be the niece of the fiance, Jalen's fiance, was killed. Uh, Somebody shooting in a crowd. So that so now you have that, but then also um, things that aren't helping the climate here is the response of, I hate to say it, the Akron Police Department here, where you have protesters and the way they're treating protesters. And then you had another arrest that somebody had videotaped where they're really physical with this person they're trying to arrest. Where I hear in that one, the guy lost two teeth while they're trying to detain him. So it's like, come on, you have the national spotlight on you right here. Everybody's looking at you, and if you're going to react like that when everybody's watching, what are you doing when the cameras aren't on? When national TV isn't here, what are you doing there? What are we not seeing? So that's not helping matters. I think today is kind of a quiet day. The funeral's tomorrow. So after the funeral, I don't know because it was heated here. Um, uh, Luckily for me, I don't have to go out much because of my job doesn't require that. But I know, like I said, that first day we went to that peaceful protest, we went home, and I have a daughter that's standing on a in a dorm down on the Akron U campus, which is right downtown. And she had came home, but she wanted to go back down there, and we was like, "You sure?" She said, "Yeah, I'm, secure everything." So we took her down there, and everything's fine. But then when we go to leave, whoo, streets were blocked off. They're arresting people. They jumping on people, and it was like, I can't believe she got us out here in the middle of this. So I think right now today was pretty calm, but I'm not sure about tomorrow. And I know some things we talked about yesterday is. Like I said, you're going to have the police expert on after me. I'm not a police expert. Um, but I think some changes have to come because, like you say, even if this person was a troublemaker, but he was not. He was not. Like I said, I don't think he got any attention his whole time in high school because he was just a mannerable young man. His father was a hard worker. He followed in those footsteps. He was a hard worker. Um, but even if it was, he was a troublemaker. The way it ended, that reaction, that the way they responded to him, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And I think, like you say, we talk about our kids. I have 5 kids, 3 sons, and those sons are in that age group. If they're having a bad day where they're making have lapse in judgment, I'm hoping, I'm praying that that's not the response. And the police union has already come out here saying, "Hey, this was a justifiable shot. That's what they should have." I'm thinking, no, that is not justifiable. No way. That is not the response we want to have to somebody that, I mean, at worst is having a bad day because as it's when he was shot, he had no weapon on him, and for you to shoot him down, where I mean, I don't think they treat animals like that. I mean, if it was a rabid dog, I don't think they would have put that many rounds in him. So how afraid were you? And then you, as we discussed yesterday, the dichotomy, the juxtaposition in that same week in Kentucky, you have a gentleman down there. I shouldn't even say gentleman, but I mean he shoots and kills 3 officers, and they apprehend him. He makes it to his arraignment, and then 4 days later in Chicago, you have somebody that shoots and kills 8 people, and that person makes it to his arraignment. But this gentleman here, who has, we don't know yet, maybe a broken tail light. They said it was a equipment malfunction. So we're looking at maybe the light was out on his license plate. He gets 60 rounds put into him. I mean, and I've said this, and I don't mean it in a flippant way, but how many people must a white man kill before he's perceived as dangerous as this black kid with the broken tail light? I mean, it's like they weren't as afraid of them as they was as this kid with the broken tail light. So I don't know. I think some changes need to be made. If they think that's acceptable, somebody got to go. The mayor, safety director. I don't know. I can't get into that, but I think some changes, and we discussed yesterday where I think there has been some changes in the police department here where not for the good, where we used to have a rule where if you worked for Akron Police Department, you had to live in the city of Akron. And eventually the state house here in Ohio eventually got more and more rural and suburban, and they took away that rule. They said Akron couldn't do that. And so these new recruits, they're not necessarily from here. They don't have that tie. And we briefly discussed yesterday, Jayland, as he was coming up, he wrestled on our youth team. Our youth team, he joined that when he was about 7 or 8 years old. His dad brought him to that team because he was friends with the head coach. But the head coach was an Akron police officer that worked Akron Police for 30 years, retired in December. When he got to high school, he wrestled for me, but he played baseball. his his baseball coach at Bookto High School was Akron police officer that retired back in January. And I'm thinking if those cops that just retired were out there that night, I don't think we have this outcome. I'm almost certain we don't have this outcome. But those older guys that had that ties to this community that didn't just come here, get the paycheck, and go back running back to their suburb or wherever they're going. Um, those folks, I think, would have took a little bit more time and don't just see these folks as somebody that needs to be put down because they're not listening to our instructions. Need to be, um, I don't know. And I probably went off
No,
I
listen,
probably shouldn't
listen,
have, but
listen.
uh,
You're there. You know the pulse of what's going on in the area, and you know the sentiment of the people that are talking. I am going to have a guest on so that I can ask some of these very specific, very direct questions. My next guest has spent a lot of time training people in these scenarios, so I'm going to be able to ask those real questions. But I think what people lose sight on, and two things come to mind as you speak. The first one, the fundamental question mark that most people are going to have early on in the investigation before we have the information is there are 60 bullets in that kid, and he did not have a weapon, period. And I understand that there are more details between A and B. I'm never going to try to get in front of the facts. I never want to be a part of propaganda that assumes guilt on either party before we actually know what goes on. But some of the questions that I think are going to drive me in the next guest, there's a lack of trust. Every black person I know has a story about something unfortunate that has happened that you don't think should have happened that way. And I would imagine, and Rodney King probably wasn't the best example. We saw it on video. I saw the
mhm,
man being beat down. I don't recall seeing him making moves towards people that would make them feel threatened. I understand he wasn't complying. I understand he was on drugs. And I even understand that they probably had experiences where people on drugs took a beating and then were able to get up and go crazy. So there's room for understanding when people are willing to have the conversations and people are willing to get the information. But you have to understand a city where things are happening. There's a young man that's dead, and for all people understood, he was a good young man, and he was not armed. So just on the surface, folks, I'm not trying to fill in the blanks on the details. Just on the surface, it's an uneasy, uncomfortable feeling, one that you just watched um, how many black people as a whole screaming to say Black Lives Matter. I'm not talking about the organization. I'm not talking about the leadership or the organization. I don't know who the leaders are. I don't know what their causes are. When I say the words Black Lives Matter, it's because I'm black and I want my life to matter. My sons are black and I want their lives to matter. So I'm giving this context to remember that the people that are in this city have to trust that the same law enforcement they're going to be dealing with today, tomorrow, and forever has that clarity, that judgment, that willingness to understand more about the people that are there. And I think when you mentioned that it used to be a requirement that the officers there used to have to live there, and that one of them coached baseball and another one was involved in this, just a mere involvement. I know we have the police athletic league out here to try to help build and create some of those bonds so that when you're interacting with an officer, it has nothing to do with a crime. It has something to do with everything productive. But in those cases, I think people forget, and this just brings me to this other one, diversity. I think some people think the word diversity is thrown out there for the word's sake, just to hear people say it, just to feel good. It's not to feel good. I relate to Jayland Walker different than someone who hasn't lived or experienced Jayland Walker's everyday, life. I just do. I know my student athletes better than someone who doesn't. This isn't about a quota. This isn't about just making sure there's a number of people that check the boxes. It's about people doing jobs for and serving other people that they can relate to. My pastor wrote a book. It's called The Third Option. He uses God as the third option when we talk about race. But sometimes it might be a sport as the third option. Me knowing a kid from a sport. Sometimes it might be the familial connection. It doesn't matter what it is. Being connected to people certainly can help save lives. I asked you a question yesterday, and it bothered me all night. This is being investigated by a third party. I know just recently where I live, they started forcing that issue. The people involved can no longer investigate exactly what's going on. I believe it's the Bureau of Criminal Investigation out there
yes,
in Ohio.
yep.
They've come in, they're taking over the investigation. We hope every step is taken. We hope there's transparency. We hope we get enough information. But based on the years of mistrust and circumstances, like you're talking about some of the reactions to the riots, based on the temperature of, quite frankly, the country and now Akron, do you think people who look like you and me are ready for the results of that investigation either way?
It it really might depend on what the results are. Really, I know. Yeah, that's like you say. You don't want the folks that did the crime or did the instance to be. It's better than them investigating themselves. So I think even if they come back with um, what we don't like, if some other changes are still happening, I think because the outcome we want, the folks that look like me and you, is that this not happen again. That somebody unarmed is gets 60 bullets put in them. That's what we want. And if that means, you're firing these guys or these guys go to prison because of that, or if that means that the city comes up with changes, that's what we want. Like for Jayland not to have died in vain. So are we ready to accept uh I don't know. I don't know. It is a third party. I can't honestly answer that. I want to believe that hey, these folks are going to be transparent. They're going to do their best job, and I think they're going to do their best job. Um, and I think I um, will trust what they're doing, but I also think um, no matter what they come out with, I think the city council here, I think the mayor here, I think the chief of police here have things they can. Because I know sometimes, and you read the article about what happened 50 years ago in the same city about the cops shooting somebody, and then what happened about 4 or 5 weeks later. Where in that case the mayor was like, or whoever ran the police at that time was like, well, they didn't find him guilty or they didn't bring any charges. So what am I to do? My hands are tied. I think even if the BCI comes back, it's like, hey, this was quote unquote a good shoot or whatever. I think the mayor has to realize that that can't go like that. There has to be some changes, and not maybe not necessarily repercussions, but at least some changes. That hey, this is not okay. Like the police union saying this is justified. Like no, that can't stand. Something has to be changed, no matter what BCI says. If they're not bringing criminal charges, something has to be done by the city council or the mayor here to say, hey, this is not acceptable. That this young man was unarmed and took 60 rounds. Especially, this is an open carry state now. I mean, they just passed a law where you're supposed to be able to. They want everybody to have guns. Well, they don't look like me. They want everybody to have those. And then, I mean, to say, oh, we're in fear for our lives. Whenever you come up against somebody that might have one, I don't know. It's I don't know. There has to be some changes. Even if no matter what BCI comes out with, there has to be changes, or it's going to be heck to pay in this city. Um,
And this isn't exclusive to black. We're talking about it because obviously it's part of this situation. We're talking about it because we can relate to that. I'm sure it happens across all races, and I'm sure different groups feel the pressure and the pain of other groups having the ability to have a negative impact on them and feeling powerless. That's probably the most important part. Protect and serve, you always want it to include you. And if for any reason you think it doesn't, it's going to get a reaction from you. I don't want to see riots. I don't want to see more people get hurt. I certainly don't want to see anybody else die. I hope on what clearly was Jayland Walker's worst day ever, that the city of Akron is able to work through these things and the progress that you're talking about, unfortunately, as a result of it, begin to happen. I hope that that extends well beyond Akron and reaches the divided states of America, and that we're even attempting to be together. I am praying for you as a coach with the loss. I'm praying for the family. I'm praying for your city. And I'm hopeful that the people there understand that there is a process. And as long as they're comfortable that the process is moving forward and that their voices are being heard, that something good can come out of something at the end of the day, regardless of all of the details, is absolutely horrible. Coach Hubbard, all I can do is thank you. And all I can do is pray for you. I appreciate you taking the time and being willing to come on the program.
and thank you again. Like I said, thank you for letting me share the Jalen I knew, the wonderful young man that is going to truly be missed by a lot of folks. I knew him since he was about 8 or 9 years old. His father brought him, and I mentioned to you that his father actually, when I was in high school, he was one of the guys that he would come up there and show us moves and roll around just because he loved the sport and he wanted to do something, to help out. And then I said this to one of the other coaches, one of my teammates, was like, because his father passed away about 4 years ago. It's like, I hate saying this, but I'm almost glad Big Pete, that's what we call his dad, isn't here to see this because this probably would have killed him to see what happened to his son.
No question. Coach, do what you do. Keep coaching them up. Know
Thank
that
you.
I know, you know, all good coaches know we're going to have a positive impact on a lot of kids, and we'll be there for each other in circumstances like this. Again, I can't thank you enough. We're talking to Coach Robert Hubbard, coach for Jayland Walker in his wrestling career. I know he was a three-sport athlete. I can't thank you enough. Appreciate
Thank
you,
you.
sir. All right, you have a good one. Folks, it's just the reality of the times. There's a division on this. I could say, something's green. Somebody else would say it's red, and the fight would ensue, and people would take sides. I hope the city of Akron is able to get through this together. I hope calm can be restored. I hope that the police department can be empathetic to the concerns and fears of people in the community. I hope the police, because here's the other sad reality. Um, there are police officers being threatened in Akron that weren't even there at the shooting. I remember reading a report about an officer who was there after the fact to start writing reports and gathering information, whose life has been continually threatened. That's not what this is about. And for as much as we have questions and have distrust and concerns about law enforcement, and when I say that, I mean probably the 1% that are humans and make bad human choices, and outcomes are what they are. 99% of them are great, and they're doing their job, and they're here to protect you, and they're willing to risk not coming home every night when they go out there to protect us. Um, you know, they are people too. Their lives, in fact, do matter too. Speaking of which, coming up after this quick break, I'm going to bring a law enforcement officer on the air so that we can ask some of these absolutely real questions. We're going to do that in just a second. I appreciate those of you tuning in to the Divided States of America. Hang on, we'll be right back with more. All right, folks, let's talk to Lieutenant Brian Stoney. Folks, I'm aware of the sound problem. I'm working on that as we speak. I apologize. Give me 1 second, and I'll get this sound fixed. My apologies. All right, let's give it another try. I apologize. As my luck would have it, as my producing skills and directing skills would have it, I'm having problem with the audio. I'm going to cut this off. Fortunately, this information, this interview is available, and we can air that at another time. I apologize for the sound issues. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Certainly appreciate you listening to Coach Robert Hubbard talking about Jayland Walker. Coach Hubbard brought up some real issues, some things that are happening in Akron, and some real questions that I know I've always wanted to be able to ask police officers. I've always wanted to understand exactly what they were thinking and exactly how things were working. And I think we get a chance to do that. I know this interview is something you're definitely going to want to hear, but you have to hear it to enjoy it. So I'm going to end the broadcast for today with the interview that we had with Coach Hubbard, and I'm going to air this interview in its entirety tomorrow after I've been able to work out the sound issue and make sure that each and every one of you can hear Lieutenant Brian Stoney, retired 30-year veteran of a local police force, involved in lots of training and understands these scenarios and understands obviously the mindset of officers in these situations because they come up all too often. And nonetheless, I appreciate you tuning in for today. I've got some sound issues to work on between now and noon tomorrow. You can catch us every weekday, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitter. My apologies. Again, we'll look back at this years from now and think, man, do you remember how bad it was in the beginning? I'm still having a good time, but I'll work out these technical issues and have us all better prepared to enjoy the full show. Tomorrow on the show, Lieutenant Brian Stoney, answering real questions about the trust of police policing other police officers, that policing versus what it looks like in the black community, the relationship between the black community officers and police officers and internal affairs. I think there's a correlation between that. Lots of great things are going to be heard in that interview. You just get to hear it tomorrow at noon. Thanks again for tuning in. I apologize for the errors. We'll get through it. Again, a couple months from now, you'll be listening to this show and laughing about the beginning. Nonetheless, I appreciate each and every one of you. Again, we'll end for today. We'll be back tomorrow. You already know what the episode's about. I'll see you then.